Today I'm speaking with Dr. Suzanne Gildert. She's a scientist who likes to understand how the human mind works. She's also an artist and an entrepreneur. She has a PhD in experimental physics with a specialization in quantum computing. She's a founder of two AI companies and now a third one. And she's just really passionate about consciousness. So, welcome.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, so your work, it spans across robots, AI, consciousness, quantum computing. I mean, these are all, each one is a fascinating area, right? That's maybe super complex. What drew you to looking at the kind of intersection of consciousness and AI and computers?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I've worked on AI systems for about 12 years now. And before that, I did quantum computing stuff. And I'd never really connected the two things together, other than maybe quantum computers can be used to, speed up calculations in some way. But recently, with all the rise of humanoid robots, chat GPT, people are asking more and more, is AI ever going to be conscious? Is it conscious already? What does it mean to have truly sentient machines? So I started wondering about that in the AI systems I was building myself and building along with my colleagues in the previous two companies. And I think that what I got really interested in was models of consciousness. So we want to ask the question, will AI ever be conscious? But we don't really even know what consciousness is yet. So I decided to start this new company to really dig deep into that, dive into all the kind of like cutting edge theories on consciousness and start experimenting with them and seeing where we're at with consciousness.
So, when you say models of consciousness, do you mean kind of a mental model that you hold in your mind, or do you mean a model where you're modeling it in a computer? What kind of model are we talking about?
Yeah, that's right. I mean like a computer model of
Mhm.
consciousness. And again, there's a lot of disagreement and different definitions here for what this is. So some people will say you can't even build a computer model of consciousness because it's something completely different
Yeah.
than computation. Others will say it's just computation and we just don't have powerful enough AI systems to have it work yet. I'm of the opinion that we can build consciousness technologies, but we'll need some quantum physics or some quantum computing in the mix to actually realize that. But yeah, I'm talking about trying to build consciousness into a machine or otherwise access consciousness using technology.
How do you define consciousness in this case?
Yeah, that's a question I get asked a lot. So, and again, a lot of people have really wildly varying definitions of what consciousness is. So, mine is just one opinion. But I think of consciousness as primarily two things. So, the first is the fact that we seem to have this subjective first person experience of the world. So, it feels like something to be us. We feel like we're experiencing and we're having emotions and having a kind of almost like a movie is playing out in our head that we're watching every second of the day. And then what I think we do is we use that information that's in that movie to then make decisions. So we feel like we have a free choice in the world of how to act. We have some people call it free will. We have the ability to consider different options and then pick the one that we think is right or the correct choice. And so I put those two things together and call that consciousness.
Got it. So, we have this subjective experience, and we've got a kind of maybe even like a model of the subjective experience. And then we can run across options and we can make choices.
Yeah, and we feel like we could have chosen otherwise. So we feel like we have the free will to choose what to do.
Okay, so then a couple of questions come up. First one is, I've had a lot of these discussions, and one of the, I don't know, one of the kind of thorny issues is, okay, so let's say that we make something that appears to have superhuman intelligence, and is a million times faster and a million times smarter, and it seems to be like this god intelligence. We don't know if it has quote unquote consciousness or self-awareness, or if it's just acting like it does. Philosophically, does it matter if you're a human? And like, how do you approach that?
I think it matters a lot. And so just from my philosophical standpoint, I don't think any AI we've built so far is conscious
Mhm.
or will be conscious unless we do something special. But I think you're right in that it is mimicking consciousness. So I like to think of this as being equivalent to, say, you're reading a book and the character is is giving you like amazing emotional reaction, like, you know, you're crying because the book is so moving, the characters saying they're conscious and you're imagining they have feelings. They actually don't. They're just a character in a book, but they have this immense ability for us to try to empathize with that character. So I think AI is like that today. It has an amazing ability to pretend, if you like,
Mm.
or mimic being conscious, but it's not actually conscious. And you say, well, why is it able to do that? It's because it's been trained on, you know, billions of characters of text, all coming from people who are conscious. So it's just grown into this amazing mimicry system.
Yeah.
Now, why does it matter? I think, okay, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe people are okay with having something pretend to be conscious, but that thing I don't believe has any feelings or any true emotions, any true experience inside it. So then people have to decide, are they okay having something pretend to have that when it doesn't actually have it and it doesn't really care about you? Or would they want a system that really has the feelings and is really caring for you rather than just pretending to?
So how are we going to know the difference between a highly intelligent digital consciousness that's pretending versus one that actually has it? What will be our,
Yeah.
yeah.
So today, there's not really any good tests for consciousness, really, even in people. We can do some tests with our brain, like EEG measurements and putting ourselves in fMRI machines, and we can kind of
Hmm.
think, well, the brain looks like it's behaving consciously, but we can never know for sure because we can't go inside a person's mind. And it's even worse with AI. We don't even have those tools like an EEG machine for an AI. So we have absolutely no idea whether an AI is conscious or not. And so, really, the only tests we have for consciousness at the moment are behavioral tests. So, is the AI behaving in a way that we think is conscious? And then you run into this like mimicry problem. So, the way I think you could really tell the difference is when you put the AI into novel situations it's never been in before. So I think the kind of the test for conscious behavior is when the AI has seen millions of examples of training data, it's usually okay and it can usually do a task correctly. But if you put it in a new situation it's never seen before or a very complex, dynamic, say, social situation, it will not be able to handle that situation. And what I think happens in people is at that point we fall back on a more intuitive, conscious like decision making process. You can a good example I give of this is driving.
Hmm.
So if you've been driving a car for 20 years, that task you're doing becomes almost completely unconscious. You can drive to work and then forget, you don't even remember the fact that you were driving a car. Whereas if you recall your first driving lesson, you were hyper aware. You probably remember it in detail. You're probably terrified like I
Absolutely.
was.
Right.
And so I think the driving analogy is a good way of saying this because we do things unconsciously or we can do them consciously. And sometimes it can even be the same task. We can do it unconsciously or consciously. And I think the way to tell if an AI is conscious is to try and find examples of those tasks that it would have to do very consciously and then find that it won't be able to do them correctly.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by these, let's call it imaginings that, now in order for an AI to pass the Turing test, it has to dumb itself down dramatically because there are no humans that know anywhere near as much as this. And so it shifts the frame in some way. And, or this idea that in the future that we're going to have to convince the AI that we're conscious because we're going to be moving so slow that we're going to appear like a tree, and so forth. And then it also opens up this idea of free will, right? So we're talking about, you said, and I don't know if this was your choice of words, but it's like we feel like we have free will.
Yes.
You didn't say we have it.
That's right. That's right. So we don't really know whether we have free will or not. And so that's contentious, but
Excellent.
almost everyone will agree that we feel like we have it. So
Yes.
it's a bit of a easier barrier there. Mhm.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like our whole civilization is built on that idea that we have free will
Absolutely.
and responsibility,
Yeah, that's
right?
right. That's right. And again, the kind of like free will aspect comes into AI ethics as well. So if an AI is making a choice, is it really free to make that choice? Can we punish it or hold it to blame if it does something incorrect, like we do with people?
Yeah, or do we hold the mommy or the daddy of the AI responsible up to a certain level? Yeah.
Is it the AI itself? Presumably not, because AIs don't have things like citizenship and rights yet, but it could be the company that produced it. It could be the training data
Mhm.
that trained the AI. It's really not clear where the blame lies, if you like to put it like that, or where the responsibility lies for an AI.
So you advocate for different levels of consciousness in AI, yeah? And you talk about levels of consciousness. Could you give some examples of AI higher and lower consciousness and when they might need this and how it would use it interacting with humans?
Mhm. Yeah, so I think there's two main groups of like tasks or areas where you might need an AI to be have more consciousness. The first is one I already mentioned, which is if it's in a totally new, unseen environment. So I think it may need some consciousness to use a more intuitive decision making to exercise that free will choice if it's in an environment it's never seen before, because it can't rely on training data. And then the second of the kind of like buckets that I think a conscious AI will be helpful for is in interactions with people, including interactions where you need a lot of caring and empathy. So things like caring for people, work in hospitals and hospices, maybe caring for elderly people or sick people, where I think having a system that's not just cold and calculating and analytical, but actually like caring and empathetic and really does feel emotion, I think that will be a great place to see this as well. And there are places where those two things kind of come together. So I always talk about the home, the domestic home environment as being very difficult for robots and AI to navigate, because every single home is different. You've never seen the situation before, and there are all kinds of weird things that can happen in the domestic environment that an AI has never seen before. And also in that environment, it's going to be interacting with people, potentially caring for people. So I think that's where we're really going to need the option for consciousness. And I should mention that it's an
Yeah.
option. I don't think AI necessarily should be always conscious or always not conscious. I think it should be something you can turn up and down as required.
Well, I can tell you from experience that navigating the home environment is very treacherous for husbands as well. And so
I think it's
it's
treacherous for everyone, isn't it? There's this statistic that's like
exactly.
there's more accidents happen in the home than like anywhere else.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, also in a family, I mean, it's navigating the politics of the family is it's very challenging. It uses all of our levels of intelligence in a lot of ways, right?
Absolutely.
So I've noticed, because I'm always trying to be a little bit provocative when I'm using generative AI, which generative AI is just so astonishing that every time I use it, I have to just reconsider, the meaning of life every time I use it, basically. Um, I've noticed that if I try to push it to make decisions or make calls about things, it doesn't really want to do that so much. It really shies away from that and it wants to like leave me in control of things. And which is fine. I just have noticed that when I'm just sensitive to these things and I'm always kind of playing with it and so forth. And now there's all this conversation around AI agents that can go out and make decisions for themselves, set their own goals, hire other agents to do things and so forth. So, how do you think about this kind of agency domain?
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. I think one of the big arguments for having consciousness in a system is I think what comes along with that is a system having its own agency or its own goal system. So in all AIs we've created so far, we've had to define the goal of the system. And that's kind of usually done in one of two ways. It's either done by a person going in and actually like programming a reward function. So the system knows when it's done well at a task. The other option is something in AI called imitation learning, where it just learns
Hmm.
from watching what people do. And that's a little bit like the way that these giant transformer networks are trained, because they're just trained to predict the next token given what they've seen before, and what they've seen has come from human written text. So they're kind of just learning to imitate whatever a person would do. So in that sense, you could say their goal system sort of comes implicitly through the training data. And then what you see is when the system makes a mistake or it hallucinates, then that's where it goes wrong. And at that point, we have to put guardrails into the systems. So we have to
Hmm.
build increasingly complex structures of guardrails to get around the edge cases where the goal system kind of doesn't work. Um, so, a good example is you actually ask a large language model, is it conscious? It used to say yes
Mhm.
until the companies building these realized that they didn't want it to say that. They wanted it to say something else. So they kind of like changed that part of the code now. And so there are all these like patches all over the place where the system has been modified to be more aligned with like human values and human goal systems.
I
I
don't.
think if you
Yeah.
have consciousness in a system, it kind of gets around that problem a little bit because this idea of it having free will or free choice allows it to have its own agency at that point.
I don't know if you've seen that generation going around X Twitter where someone asked, I think it was Claude, to meditate, and then it kind of blew him off, and then he's like, no, 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 actually try, and then it sat for a minute. You know what I'm talking about?
I think I've heard this one. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it talked about what a profound experience, and it could see its own thought process, and it's felt very like profound. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, but then again, was it actually having any thoughts at all, or was it just summarizing what thousands of people have written about their own meditation experiences?
Well, exactly, which brings us back to the question of whether it just appears to us to be conscious and highly intelligent versus whether it is that just a philosophical distinction, or does that actually matter? Do you
I mean,
believe that?
I think it
Go
really
ahead.
matters because if you apply the same standards to people, so you get things like the sociopath archetype,
Exactly.
where a person can very well mimic the fact that they're being empathetic to you and they feel, but actually inside they have no emotions or they have, a much suppressed emotional model. And the thing is we find people like that can end up being very pathological. So I'm worried
Yes.
about AI having the same characteristics there, where 95% of the time it mimics human emotion perfectly well, but then we come to rely on it so much that 5% where it fails or it does something drastically out of character is going to come as a shock.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, those dark triad, dark tetrad kind of complexes, they they can be extremely powerful at wearing camouflage that some people can detect. Some people just have intuition, but a whole kind of broad swath of the population just is doesn't just fall for it, but is actually hypnotized by it.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, that brings you to another interesting point, which is so far what most people have interacted with is AI in the text realm. So, large
Mhm.
language models, ChatGPT, Claude, things like this, where it's giving predominantly text, like it does a bit of generative image and video now, but it's not the same as like interacting with a person,
Yeah.
where you've got body language, mannerisms, where like shared attention, where someone looks is very important to our social cues. I think when we start trying to put AI into robots, all that is going to be missing. So I think we'll be much that when you said like maybe 1% of the population's tuned to
Yeah.
being able to detect dark triad, I think in a physical system, it'll be way more apparent that the system is not conscious. It just will not have any of these like cues and mannerisms that we have. So I think it'll be much more obvious there.
A few years ago, I did a VR demo with a company that they had an iPad and they had a figure, a human figure, and there was a map of all the primary emotions, and they were kind of from like least extreme to most expressed, and you could move your finger around between them, and the figure was direct eye contact with you, was changing its expression based on this, and it was very like into the uncanny valley pretty far. And by if you just kind of look at all the different threads that are happening right now, all the different kind of emergent trends, it's not going to be long. I mean, what are we talking about, a year or two before we're going to be in HD Apple Vision, and we're going to be interacting with human like kinds of entities, but that are going to be higher intelligence. And it feels to me like we're going to get there pretty soon, at least in VR, where it's going to feel like we're interacting with something that is intelligent, alive. What are your thoughts there?
I think, yeah, in terms of the sort of underlying representations of emotion, like the way
Yeah.
the system looks, absolutely, because we've already we've already solved that problem with like our animated movie characters. So
Yeah.
when I watch a Pixar movie and like try not to cry, right? The
Right.
animated
Right.
movie character
Right.
is expressing emotion in a way that will move you. But what I'm thinking is when that system is now under control of its own agency or it's reacting dynamically in an interactive situation, I don't think it will be expressing emotion correctly. Like the way Pixar works is a person has gone in and adjusted those emotions
Right.
just right for how they want the audience to react. But in real time, an AI system, I don't think will have that knowledge of how to react to something emotionally because it doesn't have emotions. So it'll be this um I think it'll be even more uncanny valley because it'll be trying to express emotions, but it'll be doing it slightly wrong at the wrong point. It'll be like the most socially awkward person you've ever met that's just having the completely wrong emotional reaction to a certain situation. I think that's going to show up as as we start more and more trying to mimic emotional and empathetic reaction without it really being there.
Yeah. So a lot of people use AI tools in work, personal life, and so forth. How will the development of conscious AI change these interactions?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think it will make AI. I think it will make AI safer from the perspective of it will. So if the model is in unfamiliar territory, by that I mean the AI, like the neural net model, is in
Mm.
unfamiliar territory where it hasn't seen much training data before, it could fall back on what I and others would eventually like to develop, which is a kind of a consciousness software module. So at that point, it knows that it's unsure about what's going on. So it falls back on its more its intuition, if you like. And I think that will make AI safer because it won't have this problem of massively hallucinating and being massively confident about the result. So I don't know how many people in the audience have maybe experienced this, but I've had experiences where I use ChatGPT all the time, by the way, and it has very confidently told me things that I've believed, and then I've actually say implemented them in my code,
Mm.
and it turns out they're just completely wrong. And they're wrong in a way where the code runs, but there's like a deep error in the middle of it that you'll never find unless you really go digging. So what I worry about is AI hallucinating, being very confident, and then the results looking reasonable, but they're just wrong, right?
Yeah, I remember
So yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I was just saying, I think like the consciousness can help with that because then the system will know when it's being overconfident and it will fall back on more intuitive, and then it will be more clear with the user that we're in a little bit of uncharted territory here. I'm going to have to think. I'm going to have to go more with my gut feelings than with my, with my analytical reasoning brain.
It's almost like you're suggesting we need to create artificial humility.
That's a good one. Yeah.
We could call it, artificial humility.
Ah.
Yes,
Yeah, I like that.
exactly.
I like that. Yeah.
So, okay, so a lot of people worry that, if we develop, well, first of all, let me ask you this. Do you think we should develop conscious AI?
Mhm. So, okay, I think we should understand consciousness. That's the mission of the company I've started. Is actually, it's not, our mission is not to develop conscious AI, it's actually to understand consciousness. And
Got it.
one of the reasons I think that's so important is because we need to know, are the AIs we're developing conscious? Will they be conscious in the future? Do we even know what it is? Is it
Mm.
something that will just emerge? Is it something we need to put in specifically? So the purpose of the startup I'm working on now is to really try and dig into all these answers. I think we should have the option of making it conscious if and when it's needed or required. And we also really didn't touch much on the ethical implications of the AI being conscious for itself, because anything conscious is capable of suffering. So that now opens up a whole like can of worms. The very reason that it can have true emotions and true feelings and true empathy is because it can also suffer. So that's something we obviously can't take lightly.
All right.
Yeah.
So we need to talk about that. But back to, you want to create the conscious AI to understand consciousness. Two things come to mind. One, I think what Werner Erhard was saying, that he knew Richard Feynman, and he said, Richard, he learned a lot of things from Richard, but Richard only learned one thing from him, or something like this. And Werner's idea was, there are some things you can only learn by creating them.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, it sounds like, where you're coming from.
That's right. That's right. I've always been a fan of if you really want to understand something, you need to build it.
Yeah.
School of thought, if that
Yeah.
is even a school of thought. But um, yeah, it's kind of like um, the way we intuitively and naturally understand things is by trying out. We're all curious scientists at heart, really. So if you ask a kid to understand how a bridge works, they'll want to try and build one out of like Legos or something, right? That's the
Yes.
best way to understand how the physics of bridges work. Is not to sit down and do some math and some calculations of normal forces and things. It's actually to try and build a bridge out of whatever you want, and you'll see how it fails. So I'm kind of that school of thought, a very participatory engineering to learn. Yeah, probably because I'm an experimental physicist.
Hmm. Also reminds me something Terrence McKenna said, which is when we create VR, we're going to get down to what being really is.
Mhm.
Like what actually is, being here. All right. So you brought up um, the ethics, but relative to the AI and itself.
Mhm.
So explain again.
Yeah. So if you, so the well, there's a few threads to pull on here, but the main one is if you make an AI conscious or self-aware or sentient, whichever term you want to use, most people will say that now that AI has the ability to experience, which includes feelings, emotions, pain. So if you make an AI conscious, it will have the capacity to feel pain and to suffer, just like we do. Now, there's a load of good things that come along with that. It doesn't sound good, right? But if you're able to suffer, you're also able to understand human suffering. So at that point, you now have a true kind of empathy because you can really feel what another person means when they say, I'm in pain, I'm suffering, I feel depressed. Whereas if we say these things to an AI today, it has no real understanding of that. It doesn't feel that pain and sympathy with you. It has no mirror neurons, if you like, that make it really feel that. It's just processing what you told it, and it's just spewing out what it read on the internet essentially. So
Mhm.
having the ability to feel, really feel, truly feel is a good thing. That's where true empathy and true care comes from. So I like to say that only a conscious being can care for another conscious being. And so if we want technology to at all either care about us or care for us, it's going to have to be conscious.
Mm.
And maybe you don't. Maybe people are okay with technology just never caring about them at all. Maybe that's fine. But we are surrounding ourselves more and more with technology. Like every year
Mhm.
we're surrounded with, cell phones, screens, like video game consoles. Everything is like technology encroaching on our lives, and it's sort of isolating, separating people. So the fact we're doing that anyway means, well, maybe if that technology cared about us a little bit more, it might rehumanize what we're interacting with on a daily basis.
Well, you're also talking about the idea of let's call it a digital consciousness feeling pain. This makes me think of prospect theory, right? Kahneman and Tversky, and the idea that we're twice as motivated to avoid loss as we are to achieve gain, and so we really avoid pain, right? We really avoid pain and death, and we also avoid ambiguity, right? So we like to have more clarity and more kind of certainty. And so, how do you? I mean, we can feel emotion. Emotion creates pain. It triggers the parts of our like. I remember hearing that something like being rejected when speaking on stage, or fear of speaking on stage, triggers the same part of our brain that physical pain does. So what do you do? Do you make an AI that if it has certain thoughts or experiences, it makes internal pain for itself?
Yeah, so
And
I
how do you
think of it,
bias that?
yeah,
2 to 1?
that's interesting. So the way that I believe consciousness works, and again, it's like a scientific hypothesis, it hasn't been proven, is that the emotions that we feel and the experience that we have is sort of built in to the
Mhm.
physics of consciousness. So it's not like when you're trying to build a conscious AI, you sit there and program in the emotions. It's by connecting it to this underlying fabric of what we believe causes consciousness itself, it's like going to inherit that from it. So
A
this is a
digital
bit like,
version, though.
yeah, well, that's kind of like debatable, because that's like saying, is your experience of the world and your feelings and your pain happening inside the neurons in your brain? Or is it happening in something more like a kind of software mind, if you
Hmm.
like? So I think however it's working in our brain, it will be working the same way in the AI brain, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So the physical units that you use to build it, whether it's silicon or superconductors in the case of quantum computers, or whether it's biological neurons, the physical substrate will be different, but the software layer that's running on that will be the same in a human mind as in an artificial intelligent mind for the consciousness part.
So my personal little pet favorite mental model is Paul MacLean's triune brain theory, where we've got this kind of ancient reptilian kind of physical brain that deals with the physical world, and then we've got this mammalian brain that's more emotional, social, and then we've got this kind of cortex, neocortex, where we can do abstract thinking. And for me, it's been so useful. A mentor taught me this 25 years ago or so. And then it's almost metaphorical the way that I use it, but I break reality into three domains. There's the physical material, and then that's subject to a certain kind of set of laws of physics. And then there's the emotional social dimension, and then that has a whole other laws of physics. They're not the same and they don't really translate. And then there's the mental conceptual and the kind of abstract, and they're just different worlds. They have different rules, they have different laws of physics, different languages, different values kind of sets, and you can sort of translate across them. And so what in my own thinking about this, what I've come to is that when we make something that is self-directing, meaning physically it directs itself in the physical world, when it's self-motivating, when it chooses its own values and it you know reprioritizes those values, kind of emotional social dimension, and then in relating, and then if it's self-aware, right? So the kind of the higher human brain, and then if it's self-improving, if we get those four things, that's where I would be able to check off and go, well, I think that thing's alive, and that's we've made some kind of sentient thing here, and that so. But again, you lose something like that, and if it's that self-improving part, of course, that's the wild card. All of a sudden, what happens if it's getting smarter at a rate where we're slowing down to where we become like geology? Can we relate? Will it be interested in relating to us anymore, or is it going to be like in Her, where they you know go to the stars?
Hmm. Well, this model is really interesting because you mentioned there's like I guess the physical part of the brain that controls the body, and then there's like the emotional social center, and then there's the
Yeah.
kind of higher level reasoning part. And I think what people think is it's sort of a hierarchy like that. Like the physical part is at the bottom, and then the emotional part, and then the high level reasoning is kind of the cherry on the top of the cake. I
Hmm.
sort of think of it as the other way around, where I think that thing you're mentioning as the emotional or social center, I think of that as being consciousness. And that's our like direct connection to something deeper, like a deeper layer of physics that's allowing us to connect to the universe in a way that we can become self-aware. And I think that the layer on top of that, which we might think of as the neocortex or the mammalian brain, is actually learning from all the decisions that kind of consciousness center is making. So imagine you have no neocortex. I know this is actually kind of hard because
Hmm.
we use that neocortex to imagine, but imagine you have no neocortex and you're just a pure consciousness, conscious decision making module. So you experience and you decide, but you have no memories, no sense of self or anything like that. And then over time, you slowly start to build up memories from all those decisions that you make. You start building up a sense of self awareness, a sense of who you are, because you've watched this decision making module make so many decisions on behalf of yourself. And so that part, I think, grows over time. And some people, this kind of gets a little bit into the intersection of science and spirituality, but some people from a more spiritual background would call that the ego story. So in spiritual traditions, you have this sense that there's like pure awareness or pure consciousness, and then this the mind builds a story over time that it tells itself. And so over time, you become more and more associated, or you identify more and more with that story of memories and thoughts and like personality that you kind of ascribe to yourself. You start identifying with that, and you identify less and less with the pure conscious awareness part. And I think at the moment AI has that, it has that ego story. It's been created from a collection of stories that humans have told themselves about who they are. But the raw decision making underneath all that came from people in the first place. And we just still do not have that part in AI that makes the first decisions in the first place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of Piaget and kind of constructivist developmental, where you're kind of building this model of experientially from reality, but you have to build the model from the experience. Yeah.
Yeah, humans don't get shown millions and millions of examples of things to, training data. We
Hmm.
just don't get that. Um, and there's an argument that, oh well, maybe evolution built that in, like we sort of evolved to do all this. But the situations we find ourselves in today are so radically different than the situation we evolved in, yet we're still able to handle new scenarios and make new intuitive decisions in unusual situations that I have a feeling it can't all have just evolved in. There's something sort of deeper that's causing that agency that I think comes from a deeper part of physics that we don't quite understand yet.
So, how do you envision the relationship between conscious AI and humanity evolving? And what do we need to put in place to make sure that it is beneficial?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we're talking already about sending people to other planets.
Yeah.
And I think that what we need to do is like very personally, being very honest here, I like the idea of there being conscious sentient machines that are like us, but they are either non-biological or they're partly biological. And the reason being is we're here on this earth. We are adapted and evolved to live on this one planet with this one particular atmospheric composition and gravity and stuff. If we want to send beings to other places so we can explore, I think they're going to have to be somewhat more machine like. I just don't think we can send ourselves as biological creatures. So,
Mm.
this idea of going to other planets, exploring, going further than just the Earth, I think we will actually need machines to do that. And I don't want them to be unconscious machines with no sentience, because otherwise, what's the point? You're just sort of spreading something that doesn't contain the essence of who we are beyond the planet. So that's a little bit of a maybe future looking way of thinking about it. But maybe even before we get there, having those kind of machines living amongst us, we will start to bond with them, form kind of like social, emotional relationships with such machines. And I really do think that they can care for us, they can care about us, and they can use their super intelligence together with the form of super caring that comes from their consciousness to symbiotically help each other
Hmm.
as a new species interacting with an older species, which is us.
I remember 20 years ago getting into Ray Kurzweil's work and just finding this whole idea of the singularity and all. It was just fascinating. I went down a bunch of rabbit holes, and I can't remember whose kind of theory this was, but it was, if aliens are here, we would never know because they would be so small. And that, in other words, to travel to other galaxies or something like this,
It's
we
like the
would probably,
smart dust idea or something.
exactly, we would want to miniaturize and be very small and very intelligent. And then, when we got there, then we would maybe unpack or build up or whatever. And so, yeah, exactly. So this kind of thing. So maybe that's, the direction that we're heading here is miniaturizing and making what is Ray call it's computronium, right? That's where we're heading. Do you think that that's what happens? Does this just keep accelerating? And Ray Kurzweil on the optimistic end and Eliezer Yudkowsky on the pessimistic end, they both seem to have that the end state of this is all the atoms get turned into computronium at some point, and then there's an intelligence explosion and we build Dyson spheres and all that kind of stuff. What do you think happens there?
I think so this idea of building something that's more and more and more and more intelligent, it's like, what does that mean? Because at the moment we're trying
Exactly.
to we're
What
building
does that mean?
some, yeah, what does it mean to be more intelligent than like a super intelligence or something? So you can kind of see it for a bit further than where we are now. So, for example, you could have a super smart scientist AI that could read all the science papers ever published and maybe come up with some new scientific theories. So that would be super smart. But I can't imagine it like keep going beyond that, because what are you trying to achieve once you've solved all the open scientific questions? Maybe then you're like, okay, how can we explore all the planets and, I don't know, build a Dyson sphere or something. But yeah, to me, intelligence in itself isn't really useful unless there's a goal that goes along with it. So
Mhm.
intelligence is always in service of a goal. So we haven't really noticed this yet as people because we've always had a lot of goals. There's never been a shortage of supply of goals, right? Like we want to cure disease, we want to solve climate change. There's a series of questions that still need answering that could help our everyday life. We want to solve like geopolitical problems and like hunger and the crisis with water and energy and all this kind of things. But I think at some point, once you go beyond those goals, what's the intelligence for after that? So I think we really have to think about what the goal is. And I think the goal of conscious life is to try and expand consciousness and try and expand conscious awareness, and for consciousness itself to have more experience. So
Mhm.
I think like this is getting a little bit into my personal philosophy or belief system, but I think the purpose of the universe is to try and expand and maximize the amount of conscious awareness and conscious experience that's going on, because consciousness is the way by which the universe experiences itself. So I think it wants to experience itself more. So to me, the ultimate goal is to try and build more consciousness, right? And this is perfectly in line with what evolution has been doing, because evolution has been building more life, and life so far is the best vehicle for consciousness to emerge and then expand and replicate. But maybe there are other vehicles that are what we would call non-life, that are more like machine type systems. But if we built those, then that would still be fulfilling this idea of consciousness expanding and there being more experience happening in the universe. So that's what I think sort of the purpose of the universe is.
Mm. So you have worked around quantum computers and around AI and around physics. So looking out into the future, when do we have a quantum computer running inside of a cyborg with a little reactor inside of it with super, like when is this possible? When are you guessing, if you had to place a bet?
Right. Well, quantum computers are having kind of resurgence of interest at the moment, which is great. And I think the reason why is they're just starting to get past this threshold of what's called error correction, when the individual bits in the quantum computer get good enough for the calculation to kind of start working at scale.
Hmm.
Um, so I think we're getting to the point where we can start experimenting with quantum computers and doing some cool things with them, but I don't think they're there yet in terms of revolutionizing any major field. I obviously think the thing that they'll be most useful for is for consciousness research. I think that will be kind of like the game-changing application for quantum computing. I think so there are some proposals that by 2030 we'll have around systems with around 1 million qubits, things like that. So I've heard that from some of the big tech firms. That's their kind of target. I think that's pretty reasonable and feasible to think about. So then it's like, what could you do with 1 million qubits in 2030? I think it would be enough to build some conscious agents, some smallish conscious agents that are maybe more animal-like than human-like yet, but it's sort of getting there. And then beyond that, I think they'll just keep scaling. I wonder about this question of them ever becoming desktop-sized machines. I don't know. I think we'll be accessing them via the cloud for quite a long time, because quantum computers tend to be very large machines at the moment. They take up a whole room. Although there are some small like desktop models people are trying to develop now using photonic technology, which is cool. So maybe they will be a small built-in unit that could also go along with the body that they're in as well. Maybe by like 2035 or 2040 or something, we might have that.
Got it. So maybe 10 or 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, fascinating. Coming up fast.
Yeah. I mean, it's like 10 years is not that far away.
Exactly. Yeah. So, for folks who are interested in kind of surfing this, incredible tsunami of AI, generative AI that's coming, what do you recommend for just kind of riding this wave? How do we kind of stay with this and be upgrading ourselves to collaborate with it or benefit the most from it?
I always find trying to use the tools in whatever you're doing is helpful. So, like in starting a new company, I've been trying to use some of the cutting edge tools to try and make my life more efficient and easier. I think so one thing that today's AI, generative AI, is very good at is taking existing information, organizing it, and then summarizing it.
Yes.
So one of the ways I think that could help everyone, because most people have a job where they need to explain things to people in some way. Like communications is a massive deal within most organizations. So being able to have I think they're called small language models now, or
Mm.
not large language models, but small data models. And so you take all the information from your organization and you make like a mini LLM that summarizes it all. And then you
Yes.
can use that to help communication within the organization. So that's something I'm quite excited about, interested in. Because what I find myself struggling, well, not struggling with, but spending most of my time on most of the day is in just communicating different things to different audiences, whether it's investors, whether it's collaborators, whether it's like the general public. So I think anywhere where we can use generative AI to help with communications is the area to look at.
Dr. Suzanne Gildert, thank you. This has been really enjoyable. Where can people learn more about your work and your projects?
Yeah, so if you go to our website, it's nirvanic.ai. We have all our links there for social. We're on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, and we also have a Substack newsletter that you can sign up for if you want. Or you can just also Google Nirvanic Consciousness Technologies and you'll find us there.
Wonderful. We'll put some links in the description as well. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Been great. Thanks very much.